The Australian election is unfolding amidst a breakdown of world capitalism of historic dimensions. The world is a house on fire. We are living through a crisis of proportions not seen since the Second World War. In the United States, a fascistic gangster occupies the White House. Trump is doing something that has never before occurred in history of the United States. He is openly seeking to establish a dictatorship in America, the centre of world capitalism. Every day, this process moves forward, from mass roundups of immigrants to anti-war students being snatched off the streets, dissenting judges being targeted, and the Constitution itself being treated as a dead letter. The economic war unleashed by Trump marks the end of the post-war World War II order. It is a return to the period of the 1930s, when beggar thy neighbour policies and rival trading blocs ultimately led to the worst war in human history. This is not a phenomenon of Trump alone, or in that sense of the United States. Capitalism globally is in breakdown, and the ruling elites everywhere are turning towards far-right, dictatorial and authoritarian forms of rule to try and crush the resistance of the working class. And on the world stage, their only response to their crisis is war. That is why one imperialist power after another is unveiling unprecedented military expenditure and is taking on the path of war. But if you watch the official election campaign here in Australia, you will never know there is a single pressing issue anywhere in the world. This has been the case in every Australian election, the focus always narrow on the most trivial and reactionary local concerns. Yet this campaign is even more disconnected from reality than any in living memory. It is a performance staged behind a wall of empty slogans, blatant lies, and above all, a conspiracy to keep the working class in the dark about the immense dangers they face. There is enormous anger and frustration among workers towards the entire election. As Comrade Warwick went through, this is expressed in the record number of pre-poll votes, with many simply wanting to get the whole process over with as quickly as possible. This widespread mood points to a deeper breakdown of political rule in Australia. Even before the campaign officially began, Labor's primary vote had slumped below 30%, an historic low. The collapse in support for Labor, the oldest and most essential party of capitalist rule, is not just its own crisis, but a crisis for the entire parliamentary establishment. Whichever government emerges after May 3rd, it will be marked by profound instability. As we have stated, the official election campaign is a conspiracy against the population. It is an attempt to conceal from workers the reality that whichever party cobbles together a government, they will be committed to a program of war and austerity. The policies of the government will be determined not by the pathetic and meagre cost of living promises of Albanese and Dutton. They will be dumped after May 3rd. Instead, the policies will be determined by the crisis of the Australian and international economy, intensified greatly by Trump's trade war on the world and the descent of the globe into a new world war. We are alone in alerting the working class to this danger. Now, sections of the corporate press are voicing their concern about the bereft and substance-free character of the official campaign. But they are raising it from the opposite standpoint from us. The frustration in ruling circles is that the election campaign is not being used to politically prepare for what is to come after, a massive increase in military spending and sweeping cuts to social spending and workers' living standards. Now, this was put on full display yesterday in the Sydney Morning Herald, who published an article entitled, quote, "After polling day, our leaders will come clean about the trouble we're in." Peter Harcher, the paper's international editor, compared the election to The Truman Show, the film, in which he said what's being presented is a staged illusion of Australia as a peaceful and prosperous village. Now, in the article, he cited the national security strategist Paul Dibb, and Harcher warned in his citing of Dibb, quote, "The risk of a third world war is real." But neither Dibb nor Harcher expressed any concern for the fate of humanity. Their only fear is that the Australian military is still too small and unprepared to prosecute the country's imperialist aims. As Dibb states, quote, "The Australian Defence Force is highly professional, but it is a small peacetime force. It doesn't have the capacity to sustain itself in a serious conflict, not at all," end quote. Now, the scale of what is being prepared was summed up by Gina Rinehart, Australia's richest individual and a fervent supporter of Trump, who last year called for military spending to be lifted from 2% to 5% of GDP. Now, on just 2023 figures, that would mean a military budget not of $56 billion, but of $140 billion. There is growing discussion within ruling circles about the introduction of some form of conscription, and even the possibility of Australia acquiring nuclear weapons. Now, these policies, deeply unpopular, point to the emerging war not only against external rivals, but against the working class itself, to impose staggering costs of the staggering costs of rearmament and to suppress the inevitable eruption of social opposition. But the question that Harcher refuses to ask, and frankly has refused to ask in any of the bourgeois press or recent editorials and other publications raising similar concerns, this question is a simple one, and one they do know the answer to. Why are none of these real issues being discussed openly in the election campaign? The answer lies in the profound and growing hostility of the working class to the entire political establishment. After decades of attacks on living standards, the casualisation of work, the soaring cost of housing, collapsing essential services, and the open enrichment of the financial elite, working people are seething with anger and alienation. And if the true plans of austerity and militarism and war were openly presented, they would provoke mass opposition and threaten the very stability of capitalism itself in Australia. Thus, the election campaign obscures the truth, promotes illusions, while the ruling class prepares for an ever greater acceleration of war. Now, far advanced preparations have already been made. Since coming to office in May 2022, the Albanese government has systematically positioned Australia as a frontline state in US imperialism's escalating conflict with China. Central to these efforts have been the consolidation of the AUKUS alliance with the United States and the United Kingdom. After AUKUS, under AUKUS, Australia is acquiring nuclear-powered submarines, along with a massive expansion of offensive military capabilities. This is not a defensive posture. It is a colossal, aggressive military build-up that places the country on a direct war footing and ties it ever more tightly to Washington's plans. Labor is overseeing the largest expansion of Australian military since World War II. All branches of the armed forces are being restructured and rearmed with long-range missiles capable of striking deep into the Indo-Pacific and beyond. The new doctrine of impactful projection makes clear that Australia's military is being prepared for offensive operations across the region, not just for defence, but for active participation in US-led wars. At the same time, Washington is dramatically expanding military basing arrangements across the country, with nuclear-capable B-52 bombers being stationed in Northern Territory, while nuclear-powered submarines are being hosted at the Stirling Naval Base in Western Australia. These developments confirm that Australia is being transformed into a key launching pad for a catastrophic US-led war against China. Under Labor, annual military spending has already risen to a record $56 billion. But this is just the beginning. The United States has publicly demanded that Australia lift its defence budget to 3% of GDP, which would mean at least $100 billion a year by the end of the decade. Such astronomical sums can only be financed through sweeping cuts to education, healthcare and social services, alongside stepped-up privatisation and a tax on the working class. Now, the coalition has marched lockstep with Labor in the drive to this massive military escalation. And throughout the campaign, opposition leader Peter Dutton, alongside Albanese, have competed with each other to put themselves forward as being in the best position to collaborate with the fascistic Trump administration in preparations for war against China. Both are open parties for war. The war preparations also include what military documents have described as a whole-of-nation effort, in which every aspect of society is put on a war footing, from industry to education, above all, also at universities. There is increasing talk of introduction of the mass conscription of young people for war. And the Australian ruling class is not just participating in preparations for war with China. Under Albanese Labor government, it has diplomatically, politically and militarily supported some of the worst war crimes since the Holocaust with the US-Israeli genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. Australia has also been one of the largest non-NATO contributors to the US proxy war against Russia in Ukraine, providing more than $1.5 billion, most of it in offensive weaponry. The claims that this war has been about defending little Ukraine are a fraud. Russia's reactionary invasion was deliberately provoked by the US and NATO, which wanted to inflict a catastrophic defeat on Moscow as part of their drive to control the Eurasian landmass. For decades now, the United States have been engaged in a struggle to retain and maintain its world domination. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 by the Stalinist bureaucracy, Washington has carried out wars of aggression in securing its hegemony over 30 years, including in Iraq, Somalia, Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Iraq again, Libya, Syria, Yemen, and now Ukraine and Gaza. US plans for this series of wars were outlined in 1992 in a military strategy known as the Wolfowitz Doctrine. It stated, and just to quote, "Our first objective is to prevent the re-emergence of a new rival. This is a dominant consideration underlying the new regional defence strategy and requires that we endeavour to prevent any hostile power from dominating a region whose resources would, under consolidated control, be sufficient to generate global power." End quote. This document was significant because it was an open statement defending perpetual US supremacy on the world stage. If any country developed itself economically to the point of challenging such dominance, Washington would target such a power in any way imaginable, including through unbridled military force. This was spelled out again in 2017 under Trump's first administration, in which he announced a newly adopted military strategy, and it claimed that great power competition and not terrorism was the primary threat to US national security and identified Russia, and above all China, as the main targets. This is now coming to fruition as Trump accelerates his direct war with China. As the SEP warned in our election statement, quote, "A new world war has not yet been declared, but the world is at war," end quote. We also made clear in our manifesto that war is incompatible with democratic rights. Labor, with the support from the coalition, has joined the international campaign to demonise and outlaw mass opposition. This has taken the initial form of a crackdown against all opponents of the Gaza genocide, promoting the big lie that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. You have academics, students, doctors, artists and workers being targeted, their jobs threatened, and in some cases, as with the Bankstown nurses, their lives destroyed. And this goes much further than just Gaza. The campaign is designed to whip up a wartime atmosphere and to strengthen the state in preparation for war with China. It is creating the conditions in which measures like those imposed during the two imperialist wars of the 20th century can be enacted, including the mass internment and imprisonment of so-called illegal aliens. Now, stopping this plunge into the abyss will not happen through Parliament, an institution that defends the interests of big business, the banks and the oligarchs as they demand that Australian capitalism readies itself for war. Regardless of which party leads the next government, Labor or the coalition or some amalgamation of a minority government, war and dictatorship will proceed. This includes the Greens, who are no alternative to the two-party system. They have for decades promoted themselves as progressive, pacifist alternative, but have now openly aligned themselves with Australian imperialism. In March, they released their first ever military policy, pledging $4 billion for the domestic construction of missiles, drones and other offensive weaponry. This marks the final integration of the Greens into the war drive against China. Gone is even the pretense of opposing militarism. The Greens' new role is to lend a progressive cover to the preparations for war, to dress up imperialism in green slogans about defending democracy and protecting the environment, while backing the transformation of Australia into a frontline state for the US-led war against China. The Greens are a capitalist party that support Australian imperialism, and their aims are to join a government with Labor, the same party responsible for the complete support of the genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. And in a highly revealing interview in the ABC last week, Greens leader Adam Bandt refused to condemn Labor's complicity in the Gaza genocide. The Greens are now dropping any oppositional pretense they carried out in the last year and a half in the protests against the genocide, as it begins to appeal to Labor to form a coalition after May 3rd. This transformation of the Greens is an international process. In Germany, where the Greens originated, their party is spearheading the largest rearmament program since the Nazi regime, collaborating with the Christian Democrats and Social Democrats to funnel hundreds of billions of euros into military expansion. This is part of the broader rearmament programs across Europe as all countries return to massive military spending and the economic protectionism of the 1930s. Now, in this election, the role of the fake left groups such as the Socialist Alternative and Socialist Alliance is especially revealing. They peddle the falsehood that the Greens or Labor represent some kind of lesser evil compared to Dutton and the coalition. This is a criminal political fraud. The pseudo-left are always, and has always in elections gone by, peddled the sham of lesser evilism. But they are promoting it now under conditions where this political dead end is even more discredited. We have just passed through 3 years of a Labor government whose program has been, as I outlined, war with China, support of the modern-day Holocaust in Gaza, and the biggest reversal of working-class living standards in 80 years. And the policies of Labor and the coalition on making the working class pay for the crisis, on war and on authoritarianism are identical. This shows that lesser evilism of the pseudo-left is not an innocent mistake. It is an attempt to trap workers within the framework of the parliamentary order that is heading towards world war and dictatorship. This is also the same role that they played in derailing the mass movement against the genocide in Gaza. For 18 months, these groups insisted that all that could be done was to appeal to Labor to change course. Now, with Labor continuing its full support for these massive war crimes, the pseudo-left simply calls for people to re-elect it. These organisations have nothing whatsoever to do with socialism or the working class. They are the last line of defence of capitalism itself. They speak for an affluent layer of the upper middle class, tied by 1,000 strings to Labor, the Greens and the union bureaucracy, which seeks to advance its own selfish interests within the framework of the capitalist system. For years, the pseudo-left have been increasingly open of its embrace of imperialism, That has included supporting the US regime change operation in Syria and the US-NATO war against Russia in Ukraine. But now they have taken it one step further, with the Socialist Alliance calling for military spending to be halved. That is, these Pabloite charlatans want at least $28 billion a year to be spent on weapons of war. This shows that when we say the SEP is the only alternative to workers, we are not exaggerating in the slightest. There simply is no other movement seeking to organise the working class independently on the basis of the socialist, revolutionary and internationalist program, which is required to prevent world war and secure a decent future for humanity. Against all the empty campaign slogans and lies, we are telling the cold truth. After May 3rd, no matter which capitalist party claims victory, the working class faces a series of profound shocks and attacks. War preparations will deepen. The attacks on wages and conditions will sharpen, as will the attack on democratic rights. But it will also be a period, it will not only be a period of capitalist reaction, but of mass working class struggle. That we can absolutely guarantee. It is a law of history that when inequality reaches the proportions it has, and when the ruling elite is carrying out the kinds of attacks that it will be compelled to enforce, there will be mass social upheavals. Increasingly, these will pose the questions of questions. Now, who you vote for once every not in that sense how you will vote in every 3 years, but which class rules society. The great lessons of the 20th century is that the spontaneous struggles of the working class, on their own, are not sufficient to abolish capitalism and establish a socialist society. They require a leadership that has assimilated all the experiences of the past periods, the victories, above all the 1917 October Revolution, and the many defeats. They need a leadership that is grounded on a scientific understanding of the global capitalist crisis and the objectively revolutionary role of the working class. Together, with our comrades in the International Committee of the Fourth International, we are building such a leadership. Our world movement embodies a vast experience, an immense heritage of socialist theory and practice, and an unparalleled record of outlining the independent perspective of the working class on the major events, not only of the past few years, but of the past century. We are committed to educating and training a new generation of revolutionary socialists, among young and above all in the working class, to build the party that will finally put an end to capitalism. But building such a party requires concrete decisions from individuals. That is, from the people who are attending the meeting today, both online and in person. So I will conclude with an appeal for you to join the Socialist Equality Party as a full member and take up this fight. Now is the time to get off the political sidelines, take up the banner of revolutionary socialism, and take your place in the fight for a socialist future. Thank you.
Authorised by Cheryl Crisp for the Socialist Equality Party, Level 1/457 to 459 Elizabeth Street, Surrey Hills, New South Wales, 2010, Australia.